Okay, I'm jeanie4. I've been asked to give you a story of the Matthew family. I have a picture here of my dad, Eli Matthew, which I would think he would be about 10 or 12 years old, and with his sister Emma and another sister Eugenie that passed away when she was 16, and a young brother that was at Lower, and he resides in Sault Ste. Marie with his family. My dad was lost his mother when he was quite young, and his dad remarried, and he didn't get along too well with his stepmother, so he left home early at the age of 12. Now I have a picture here of my dad's mother. It's the only picture we have. Her name was Adeline LeBlanc. And she was a redhead, a nice looking woman. And this is a picture of his brother Adlor, who lives in Sault Ste. Marie. When my dad left home when he was 12, he lived with an aunt for some time. I don't know for how long. And then as he grew older, he went in the bush and helped lay ties for the railway. And he worked there for quite a few years. And when he was in his early 20s, I think, he came to North Bay, and that's when he started to work for the railroad. And he lived in a boarding house, and it was the boarding house that my grandmother Disla was running. So there he met my mother, and was it 1912 that they were married? They were married in 1912. This is my Grandma Disla. Oh, well, when they came to move, after they moved in North Bay, as I was a little girl, she and my two aunts ran the store. They rented from my dad, and we used to love to go down, and she would give us candies. That's what I remember most about my grandmother. She was a nice old lady. And this is of all the family. My mother had 5 sisters and 1 brother, and she tells me that on this particular picture she's standing sideways because she had a sore eye, and it was puffed up and she didn't want to show it in the picture. And next to her is Aunt Louise, and then Aunt Helen, and Aunt Lorenda, and Aunt Marguerite, and Aunt Jenny sitting down with Uncle Johnny. There was only the one brother, Uncle Johnny. And Aunt Jenny was the eldest, and Aunt Marguerite was the youngest. This is a picture of my mother before she was married. She was a nice looking gal. And this again is with her sister, one of her sister, Aunt Lorenda, and I think that's Aunt Helen, and the other I don't recognize. Now, there's a picture here of my mother with Mrs. Boivin. If I remember correctly, before she was married, she worked for this Mrs. Boivin on the farm near Ottawa. Billingsbridge, I think, was the name of the town where she worked. This was a picture, I didn't recognize her friend, but she is dressed beautifully. She has a long dark coat, and over it she has a fur, I think it would be squirrel, and collar of fur collar of squirrel, and the matching muff, and a great big hat, a big black picture hat, and a beautiful alligator's purse. So she looks quite up to date in that picture. He worked there when he was in North Bay. This boarding house was in North Bay. When they were in North Bay, he worked for the CPR for a while, and then he went on to work for the ONR, which for for over 50 years. And
Yeah.
this is the picture of Mom and Dad before when they were courting, they were going together. They bought a little house on Metcalf Street, which is off McIntyre. And I don't know how many of the children, I think Dan and Mark and your mother were born there. And then they bought a house around the corner, which was on McIntyre Street, which was 379 McIntyre Street. It was a brick house, and that's where I was born. And there was 2 more that came after that. And now this is a picture of the house didn't have a veranda, but my Uncle Johnny, and this is Romeo, Uncle Johnny's eldest son, and another friend, they helped my dad build a nice veranda on this house. And this is where the 6 of us were raised at 379 McIntyre Street East. Now, yeah, this picture here is before Joe was born. Yeah, that was at 379 McIntyre Street. Oh yeah, there's a cellar window that's open there. They used to bring in the ton of coal, they'd funnel it down there to the basement, warm things up for. And this is a picture of the whole family that were raised at 379 McIntyre Street. Rainey was a baby, and Joe and myself and Blanche and Marg and Dan standing with Mom and Dad. I remember my dad saying that when he was married, he had $900 saved in his little watch pocket, and he had to go in for a hernia operation. And before he did, he gave it to my mother, and he said, if I don't come out, you keep this. But he was a saver. He had, well, in the bush, he hadn't been able to spend much. He had saved his money. Oh yeah, during the war, he also used to tell us that he worked at the ONR at that time, and they were so busy and he worked so hard that he was a week without taking his boots off. He just would grab a few hours sleep on a bench and then keep on working for a whole week at a time. The way the store came about, my dad had bought a corner house at the corner of McIntyre and John Street. And his mother-in-law, which was my grandmother Disla, and Aunt Marguerite and Aunt Louise were single, and they moved from 3 Rivers to North Bay. So they rented that house from my dad, and he had a little store built alongside of John Street and faced McIntyre, and they ran a little store there for a few years, I don't know how long. But then Aunt Marguerite was getting married, so they decided they would give up the store. So my dad decided to rent it to someone else. So he put it up for sale, and this couple came along and gave him a deposit and said they would rent from him. And then I think it was just a week before they were supposed to move in, they decided no, they wouldn't take it. And my mom and dad, with the 6 kids, decided they would move down and take it over, which they did. And they hired my cousin Selena to run the store. My mom looked after the house and the kids at that time. And then later on, it was a matter of maybe a couple of years, he decided to make the store, built the front of the house, and it was in the reversed L shape that the store was. The whole front of the house was the store, plus the one along the part that's along John Street. So this is a picture of that store where we were raised, and there was so much activity all the time. And there's a bicycle in front because we used to deliver groceries there. By bicycle, we had little boys that would deliver for us. And my dad had the big sign put up with Central Groceries, what we called it, and Mrs. A. Matthew and Son, but I don't know where the son comes in because I'm the one that looked after the store for quite a few years with my mother while Dad was working at the ONR. And we have several pictures here taken. This was the central focus of taking pictures. We're always taken in front of the store with Winchester cigarettes in the background. Yeah, here's Bobby. When he was, Mom raised him when he was, from the time he was 3 when his mother passed away. So he must be 3 years of age here. And I have one here of Grant. When Blaine was born, I went up to Timmins where his mom and dad were living, and I brought Grant back down to North Bay to mind him while his mother was in the hospital. So he's in front of Winchester too. So that's Grant with me in front of the store again. Well, he was just a little over a year old. Yeah. It was a year in December. This was right after you were born in January. And this is your mother with Grant and you in front of the store because your dad was in the Air Force then. So she was living at the store, behind the store with us while he was in the Air Force. This is Joe. He was working in Hamilton at the time. His first job was in Hamilton for, but again, the Winchester sign behind him. And this is when, and this one was Grant and Blaine when they both were living at the store with their mother while their dad was in the Air Force. And this one of me when I was looking after the store before I was married. And this is Marguerite when she was married. They had the reception and all the guests were in front of the store, and again the picture was taken of all the guests in front of the store. Oh, and this one is of my dad. Dan was delivering with the bicycle, and he went to a Mr. LaRock, I remember that, and to deliver some groceries, and he came home with a little puppy in the basket of his bicycle, and it was Muss. And here's a picture of my dad with this Muss. He was a faithful little dog. He was a good little watchdog. And he was called Muss, and we carried on the name. I don't know what it means. With the 6 of us, I was only 8 years old when we moved to the store, and I wasn't allowed in the store at that time. But as I got a little bit older, I was allowed to go behind the candy counter, and I was allowed to sell candies. That's the only thing I was allowed to do. And I could give the change. The kids would come in with pennies on their way to school. And then as we got older, after school, we didn't participate in any activities. We had to come home and help. And we all went through that. And then would deliver after school. I went away to school. I went to high school in Sturgeon Falls. So did your mother, and Marg too. They went to school in Ottawa too for a while. They went to Teachers College in Ottawa, and they started to teach. Marg was teaching in Hearst, and Blanche started in Penetanguishene, I think it was, and then she ended up in Timmins. And I went to school in Sturgeon Falls, and when I came home, I went to Ottawa in the Teachers College there, and I hadn't been at school for 2 years because I was lacking one subject, and I tried the subject and I got it, so I was allowed to go to Ottawa. When I got there, they had me write an exam, and I hadn't been at school for 2 years. They had too many students, so they had to weed them out. So I was one that was sent back home. So that's when I took over Selena's place and worked in the store. And from there, I worked in the store for 9 years, I think, till I was married. I was 18, and I was 26 when I was married, so 8 years in the store. Ran it then, and when I was getting married, Dan was living in Tomstown with Bobby, and well, Mother was looking after Bobby, so he decided to sell his store and come down and take over our store. Yeah, Mother and I got along very well running the store. Yeah, Mother. And on, I don't know if I should, on Wednesdays was a day off. That Wednesday afternoon was supposed to be the day off. And my dad rigged me up a little outfit in the kitchen, and I would make sausages. I would make sausage, about 20 to 30 pounds of sausage on Wednesday afternoon to sell in the store. That was my afternoon off. Well, I looked, you see, Mother really depended on me a great deal. And everything wasn't packaged like today. Everything you had to, a big barrel of molasses downstairs and a big barrel of vinegar that we sell. People had come with their little bottles, and the same with coal oil. To light their stoves in the morning, that was in the back shed. They would come with a little bottle, and they want 5 cents worth of coal oil. So I'd have to run in the back and get the coal oil, wash my hands, and get back behind the counter. So yeah, and you know, sugar was bulk, and flour was bulk, and dates, that was really tough. You know, you get a great big 50-pound box of dates, and somebody wanted a pound of dates, and you'd have to dig that out. But anyways, that's the way it was in those days. And then we gradually, Dad had a walk-in refrigerator at the back of the store, and we kept a lot of meats, you know, in there. And he got an electric mincer, which we were able to sell a hamburg steak, and a slicer. He used to come and want 5 slices of cooked ham sliced thin, and that wasn't easy when you didn't have a slicer, but we got the slicer, and that was a big improvement. And then we graduated to they call it in those days, an ice cream, a counter. We had the ice cream, and at the other end, you see, one end was more groceries, and that was more cigarettes and candies. At the other end, and this counter, we would sell ice cream. We would get our ice cream from Epplets from New Liskeard. It was the best ice cream in town. And they would come from all over North Bay to get their ice cream there. And it would come in on the train at night. Dan would go and pick it up and bring it. It would come in big insulated bags, big 5-gallon cans, and maybe 3, maybe one would be maple, one would be vanilla, the other one would be for just the bricks of ice cream. And we'd bring that maybe twice a week we would get that, because we were selling a lot of ice cream, because it was really tops. It was Epplets ice cream. And we were the only ones handling it. And you see, being a railroad town, we used to have a lot of credit for 2 weeks. They would get paid every 2 weeks. And I had these little books that I would give them their groceries for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, I would add them all up and tell them how much it was, and they would come and pay me. And because the money was so tight, we were very careful with unless they had a job, we wouldn't give widows any credit. Now, we had one widow, she would leave her diamond ring with mother as a collateral and mother would allow her so much groceries. And when she got her check or whatever she got, she would come and pay and we'd give her back her ring. It was back and forth. That's the way she managed, but we didn't have any credit to speak of. They were all pretty good. And we had one customer was old Mrs. Dowdle, and she wouldn't speak with anyone but me. So one day your mother, Blanche, answered the phone, and she says, "That you, Jean?" And Blanche said, "Just wanted to move things along." She says, "Yeah." She says, "No, it isn't." She hung up. She wouldn't give her the order. So we had lots of fun with people that way. We got to know them, and we had 3 little businesses during the war that started across the street, but they didn't last very long because we were well known and dependable. This was during the Depression. You see, during the Depression, we had people that would come with their voucher. They were allowed $5 voucher for a family a week, and they would come with that, and they would ask for $1. They would get $4 worth of groceries, and they wanted $1 in cash, and I wouldn't allow that. I said, "This is for they want to go to the show, you see." I said, "No, I have to give you all groceries for your $5 a voucher. If you don't want that, I can't." So I was firm on that. I wouldn't allow them to do that. And we paid everything cash. You know, when Canada Packers was one of our big suppliers for our meats, and the traveler would come around to get the order for the next week, and I would pay him for the last week. And we always were right on top of paying everything on top. And we had a little farmer that would come and bring us a little pig that he killed himself, a Mr. Butler. And we used to say to him, "We don't want it more than 100 pounds. And he would bring us this little pig, and it was just a picture. And I'd say, "Do you do that yourself?" And he would say, "Well, if you want something well done, you do it yourself," was his answer. And we had people that would go fishing, and they would stop and ask us, would we buy the fish? And we would, because it was fresh, caught right there, pike or pickerel. And we'd usually be able to sell it right in the store. We didn't buy a lot, and we never bought a lot of anything new. We would only start with half a dozen, just to see if it would go, because we didn't want to be left with stuff like that. And potatoes, we would buy New Brunswick potatoes. We'd get about, I think, 100 bags and put them downstairs for the winter. And when the delivery boy wasn't busy, I would get them to fill bags of 10 pounds. I'd weigh them 10 pounds, and we'd have them ready to sell. Yeah. We were never idle. There was always something to do. And Mother was, usually I would call her if I got extra busy, but I pretty well ran the store. And on the counter in the morning, I only had a cardboard, and I'd put in till, how much money there was in till, and paid out, and until paid out, and then on account, whatever they would pay on account. And every day I had one of those cardboards, and that was my bookkeeping. Yeah, I attended St. Joseph's School, and so did my sisters, and from there, after the first few grades, we would go to St. Vincent de Paul School, which was a French school. We all went there and graduated there before we went into high school. Now, after graduating from St. Vincent de Paul School, I went to St. Joseph's Academy in North Bay for 3 years. And then I went to Sturgeon Falls because North Bay did not have a bilingual high school, and my dad wanted us to be bilingual all through high school. And the same with my sisters went to the convent before me. They were older, and they didn't particularly like it, so they told me not to go. At the St. Joseph's Academy, it was all nuns, and they were great. Some of them were great, some were serious, but I still remember very vividly the Mother Superior, Sister St. John, used to play the piano. Somebody stole my calico, and we would dance, and we weren't allowed no cheek to cheek. If we were dancing with our buddy, no cheek to cheek. They'd come and tap us on the shoulder and say, no, no. I didn't even know what that meant in those days. I was only 13. But anyways, and I went there 3 years, and then I went to high school in Sturgeon Falls, and that was a big change for me. With boys and girls, it was a regular collegiate and bilingual in both languages, and the teachers were so respectful with us. You know, they would call us Miss Matthew and that, and I enjoyed that very much there in Sturgeon Falls. I did. I'd come home on weekends, and Marg and Blanche had gone there previous to with me, so they told me what to expect.
Oh.
Well, my dad was great on education. He didn't have any himself, and he kind of told us, you know, and the boys, like, I think he was disappointed with Dan didn't finish high school. And Joe, the first thing he knew, he didn't even know till it was parents' night that he had taken he did well at that. He seemed to be adapted to it. And Pee-wee was going to school in Ottawa when he was called to go to war. And that kind of finished his schooling. He didn't go back after that. But as far as we girls, it's just us, and like Blanche wanted to be a teacher, and it's just her that said she wanted to be a teacher. Dad just was happy that we were wanting to go to school. Living room and a dining room and a great big kitchen. And that was really the central place of the house. Great big kitchen, and upstairs there was there was 4 bedrooms. One was very small, and a bathroom, and that was a big old house. And there used to be, out from the kitchen, there was a stairway that went into the big bedroom, and they finally removed that after we moved in, and there was no stairways there. So I don't know why they removed that. But, and you see, Marg and Blanche were away, and Dan, later on, he got married, you see, and was in Bonfield and then in Thompsdown. And Joe was in, after he finished high school, he was in Hamilton. He started in Hamilton at the, and he was there, well, he was married in Hamilton. Oh, Dad, he was strict in a way, but yet he was fair. You know, we knew where we stood with him. And at the table, when we would sit to eat, he always loved politics in his own way, and we had to listen to that. And we didn't dare talk while he was talking. That's what we were told. And then he worked hard, but he retired. He was young. He wasn't 65, not quite 65, I think, when he was 64 when he retired from the UNR. But he had a 50-year pin. union pin that he was quite proud of. And in this picture, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in June of 1962. And all the five of us were there. Dan was missing because he had had a bad heart attack. You know, at first, Dad, he never liked parties. He was always afraid. He wasn't a speaker. He couldn't get up, and so we tried to talk to him into having. I can him saying, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I'll pay for it. And he said, but you do the organizing and I'll sign the check. So I said, well, anybody that lived 50 years with you deserves a party. I can remember him laughing. I was on the school board for 14 years, a separate school boards for 14 years. And he, being a boilermaker, he would go and help fix the boilers in the schools for nothing on weekends. So it would save the school board money. I remember him doing that. And Mother was with the 6 children, she was always very involved with her family. And then with the store, I was working with her, and we got along very, very well. But she had the upper hand when when there was something special that I needed her attention. She would come down and tell me yes or no. And I don't know, she was easy to get along with. She was a placid person. Dad was quiet, but he had a dry sense of humor. I remember him when he worked at the ONR. He was working, he had a helper, he called him his mate, and he said he was the most awkward person I never worked with. So one day he says, I said to him, don't tell me you carried a gun during the last war and you didn't shoot yourself. That's the kind of humor my dad had. Well, it's not like today. There was no cuddling and stuff like that. We didn't see that, but they seemed to get along okay. Mom did her thing in the store, and he had businesses up in Timmins, and he would go there on weekend to look after his business up there. And when it came down to talking business, the two of them would talk it over. And I can remember, I don't know what year it was, when I was working in the store, that it was during the war, and he said we had to pay income tax. And he said we must be very careful because this isn't going to be a War Measures Act. That's what they were telling us at the time. He says we're going to have that for the rest of our days. So he says we got to be very careful with our first form that we fill in. So I had to do that for him. I mean, he wasn't educated, but he was very, very good with figures. After he passed away, picked up all kinds of papers with his writing. He didn't write, he could only write his name, but he had very little school, but he sure could add. And there was an elderly man, I think it was his boss, a Mr. Donahue at the shop, that took him under his wing and taught. I remember him bringing a book that Mr. Donahue had given him to study. It had to do with figures and that. So he was interested. And then at home with us kids, he would pick up our ancient history books and he'd sit down and read that. He was fascinated with ancient history and that type of thing. And he always loved his morning paper. And he had his chair, we wouldn't have dared sit in his chair.
He was.
Yeah, my dad was also an avid gardener, and I remember him planting tomatoes behind the store. He had quite a nice garden there, but then when we moved across the street, he planted them along John Street, along the house, so people would see all his tomatoes, would congratulate him on his nice tomatoes. And he always boasted about having one plant had produced 100 tomatoes. So that was really something for him. But he had to say, you know, and when we went to Sturgeon Falls, Mother with her, the store, she paid for all the schooling and stuff and the clothes and the whole bit, and he would bank his salary. But he looked after the big stuff like the taxes and the heat and stuff like that. So they had an arrangement, I guess, and it just kind of fell into place as far as I'm concerned. I've never heard them talk about it. And then when Mother had saved enough money, she bought a house up McIntyre near Fisher Street and was renting. There was 3 levels. In those days there were flats, see? And there was 3 levels, and she was renting that. So it was an income for her because she had done quite well in the store, you see. He wouldn't touch the store money, but she looked after the kids, and that's what I remember. Oh, well, we always attended the French church. It was just a ritual that Sunday mornings we got up and went to church. But Dad was never a very religious person. I can remember him saying, nobody that's never been married is going to tell me how many kids to have. So, and you see, of all Mother's sisters, we had the fewest. The 13 and 12 and 10, they all have big families, but we only had 6. So he says, I don't believe in Santa Claus. That was his way of saying that he had his belief, but he believed in God, but he didn't believe in all the stuff they were trying to. So I never missed a Sunday till I got married, and the same. Barb was more religious than the rest of us because she taught school with nuns up in Kapuskasing and Hearst. There was nuns that were teachers. So naturally, some of that rubbed off on her. And the boys, I don't know. There's one thing, my dad, we had the vacant lot next door to the store, and he would make a nice rink there. And one year, they needed some boards, and Joe and Pee Wee, I guess, they went to the mill yard, and they stole the boards and put it all around, and the police was at the door, so we had to give them up. But anyways, he would always make a nice rink next door, and he used to have storm windows, you know, with the slot with the 3 holes. You'd flip over the slot, and he'd put the hose there from the kitchen tank, water tank, hose from the kitchen water tank through that, and water and we would have gangs there skating, and he arranged some kind of contraption to have lights out there too. And the kitchen was our clubhouse. We'd kick our skates and have parties there, you know, just a bunch of teenagers have fun. Yeah, I remember that quite well. We used to, and the boys loved to play hockey there. And in the fall, we would sit at the dining room table and they'd be playing football on that vacant lot. So they loved to play. Dan played hockey. We remember going to see him play. And Joe, you see, with Joe's sickness, when he was, I think about 8 or 10, he had this leaking heart valve. And at first he couldn't go to school, but then when school started, we would take him on a wagon and pull him to school, St. Joseph's School, and Dad would pay the janitor to carry him up the stairs because there was no elevator, and that's how he went to school. And Dad had a specialist from Toronto come and examine him, and he said, well, you like sports, but you're going to have to be in the crowd. He said you won't be able to participate in any sports with your heart. And he did everything the doctor told him he couldn't do. That was Joe. Yeah, he played hockey, he did everything. Yeah. But I think that's why, you see, they weren't supposed to scold him, because he wasn't supposed to get excited, so he got away with a little more than the rest of us. I really didn't start dating till I went to school in Sturgeon Falls. I was 17 and 18, and I had a boyfriend there, boyfriends, you know, there, that we'd go to parties or have a skating rink. We had a nice skating rink at the high school, and I loved going there skating at night. And I don't know about the other girls. Blanche always had lots of boyfriends, more so than Mark and I. But and then when they would come home in the summertime, we were open, the store was open till 11 o'clock at night. So after 7 o'clock, we each had 2 nights to work at the store, and Blanche had dates, so Mark and I'd fill in so she could keep her dates. But Christmas time, when we were young, we would always go to midnight mass, and then after midnight mass we used to have what they call a réveillon, and we would have, I think, meat pies then. I don't know what we had. And sometimes, I forget now, if we would open our gifts then after midnight or not. And then Mother would put the turkey in before going to bed that night, which would be the morning of Christmas. So we would have our meal at noontime. There was no big Christmas dinner like we know of it now. And it was just family. And you know, when we were in the store, there was always somebody knocking at the door, the back door. They had forgotten to get a can of something and wanted something. But we would just have, that would be our Christmas. And sometimes on Christmas Day we would go visiting, or they would come, people would drop in just to wish Merry Christmas and that. And we didn't have a lot of gifts like today. We just had one Christmas, I remember, the 6 of us each getting a pair of skates. The 3 girls were all the same, and then the 3 boys was their size too, which was the same. And our favorite gift when we were teenagers, Mother would go out and buy us each a nice new dress. And that was really nice. And Dad was looking at cars, and he had me test drive a Chev, I'll never forget. And then he came back home and was really thinking about buying a car. It would have been $1,000 in those days. And then he said, I've got 3 boys, and I think they're going to fight for the cars. So I won't buy a car, but I'll buy my 3 daughters a black Persian lamb coat. So he bought each one of us a black Persian lamb coat. And Marg, I think, was in Ottawa at the time, and your mother was, I don't think she was teaching then. She wasn't teaching then. Anyway, she got the black Persian lamb coat, and I got one that it was a little bit different. It was cheaper, and I started to cry, and I thought I should have one the same as the other 2. So I took it back, and I got one just like the other 2. And he paid $1,000 for the 3. Yeah, so that was the price of the car. We had the 3 coats at the time, but I was the youngest of the 3. When the war began, I was looking after the store, grocery store, and I saw lots of hardships there, but we managed okay. Now Dad was working, but he was cut back to about 3 or 4 days a week. I don't know, he was cut back. He wasn't having as many working hours as he used to, but with the store and his salary, we managed fine. Yeah, I remember that. But we ourselves, and I can remember when I was in Sturgeon Falls too, before the war had started, before I started in the store, and I was going to high school, and I can remember the teacher saying, I would say there's only 2 of you in this classroom that don't have to worry about where the next meal is coming from. And he named me and another person that was had a business in Sturgeon Falls. I don't know why he did that. I was embarrassed, you know, that he would, but it had to do with what he was talking about during the war. Everybody was struggling, and Sturgeon Falls had there was nothing to hire people except the odd school teacher, that's all. And the mill was closed down there too. So, but as I say, we were lucky. We never had any hardships during the war, but we saw lots of it. Yeah. Well, I remember Chuck saying to me when we were going out together, I was looking after the store, and I used to say, well, this is late enough for us. I've got to work tomorrow. And he says he never realized how hard I worked in the store until he saw me at work. Because, you see, he was in the office at Purdy Micah at the time, and he didn't have it easy. But you just couldn't buy a job. And Marg, before she went to Teachers College, she went to Ottawa to LaRux College, and she had a secretarial job degree, but then she couldn't get a job, so then she went to be a school teacher. So you just did whatever you could, and you, as they say, you couldn't buy a job, and it was hard on everybody. Yeah, we did have a good life, yeah, I would say as a whole, and a good family together. My dad used to say, there's one thing I like about my family, there's no jealousy. I always laughed about that, there was no jealousy. No, we were very close. You know, we stick up for one another. Yeah, we always stood beside one another. We were very, very close. I wasn't as close to Marg because she was away, but I was close to Blanche. Blanche and I were very close. And Joe and Pee Wee were close, and Dan was always a really easy man to get along with. I always thought a lot of Dan. Mom and Dad were quite proud of their family, I'd say, as a whole. Yeah, and they did. I find there are times we thought we were hard done by, but we really weren't. They did the best they could with what they had. They weren't educated, but they wanted us to be educated, and they wanted to give us as much as they could, you know. So I think as a whole they did okay.
For the memory of sentimental verse, nothing in my purse, and chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse, how lovely it was. Thanks for the memory.